said you wanted to talk about that before you go.
Oh, yeah, okay. see, that's what I'm talking about. All right, good morning, Broncbusters. Tyler here. We have an exciting new video to bring to you, and that is how to fit 40s on a Bronco. So as you can see, we got a whole team of people, and I'm going to do some quick introductions. My name is Tyler, Broncbuster. We have Justin and his son Avery. Now they are going to be the Bronco that we're bringing in that right now is a little short. When we're done, it's going to be up there big with Frank's and mine, and they're going to all be around that same size. So other introductions, we got Frank here. Frank has been a partner of ours in the San Antonio, Texas area. Was one of the first ones to put all of our parts on his Bronco, and I think since then probably installed more parts than anyone else in the country, because he's done, how many did you say, about 30 of the housings?
Yes, sir.
So he's very experienced at all this, so Frank is going to be leading a lot of this install today. And then we've also got Kenny from America Motors right here in Canyon Lake, Texas, which is my hometown. And Kenny is going to be one of our first installers in the country that's going to be going up on our website. So he's here to help and to be familiar with what we're doing. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get to what we're doing in this video today. So first thing we're going to be doing is the steering upgrade. So for any of you guys that haven't watched our channel before, that's what we're most known for, is the solution on the steering. Anytime you're going to lift your Bronco, or you just want to go out and off-road and have that peace of mind and security that you're not going to break your steering, we have the components that you'll want to do. I've got a steering rack here that I want to show basically what components and what is the most important first. So first off, the most important thing you can put in is this bushing, and what that does, a lot of people are going to say, hey, what is a steering rack? Well, this steering rack is what allows you to be able to turn the wheels on your vehicle. You know, as you input on your steering wheel, it comes down here to the pinion gear. Pinion gear turns this shaft right here, which is your rack and pinion. And this portion right here is blown out on this Bronco, because this is the first one that this happened on in the country, or one of the first anyways. There's a couple other people prior to me. And we came up with what that solution was. So that's a bushing that goes inside here that keeps that centered, the rack centered on the pinion gear, so you don't lose your mechanical steering. The second component is the billet aluminum housing. With the stock housing, we're finding with the stock housing that a lot of flex in there is causing premature wear and damage, to where eventually this whole thing will just blow apart. So we've come up with a billet aluminum housing that solves that problem. So we're going to be doing the install on that. And then last but not least is the buster brace. The tie rod, here's a broken tie rod right here. That's what we're trying to prevent, is the most susceptible part. But before doing these other two things, this is your fusible link. This is how we then, once the rack is bulletproofed, that's how we take care of that fusible link. So that'll be the second part of what we do, or the first part. Second part is we're going to go ahead and do a suspension lift. To fit 40s, we're not going to fit 40s under there under stock suspension. So we're going to do, in this case today, our billet 1.5 inch lift and 1.5 inch perch collars. So the perch collars that we have is going to do a little bit more lift in the front than the rear, and that'll help kind of level things out on there also. The next project we'll do, and we'll do some, when we're in there, we'll also do some cutting of crash bars, some grinding, because there are some components in there that we've got to cut. Then we'll move on to our body lift, so 3-inch body lift. If you're wanting to get, especially 40-inch tires, if you think you're going to do that all with suspension lift, you're either going to have a kit that drops your differential all the way down, which now you've just defeated the purpose of putting on 40-inch tires, because now your clearance is killed. You're going to need a combination, and that's part of why this is in here to do the 40s. So 3-inch body lift, which will involve a little bit of relocating of some wires, very small amount, but that's all included in here. And then we'll move on to that unsightly bumper gap that everybody complains about. We'll have a rear bumper relocate and then a front bumper relocate. So we'll be able to tuck those bumpers up. If you have adaptive cruise control, you'll need to get the bracket for that as well. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive in here and get started. We'll do an introduction to the vehicle and then we'll get going on it. Okay, so first step is we're gonna go ahead and do what? We're gonna take the tires off and then start the steering, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we'll go ahead and get started with that. So we're gonna go ahead and remove the skid plates first, because with everything we're gonna be doing, you're gonna need the skid plates off anyways for this whole build. You wouldn't necessarily have to remove the skid plates if all you're doing is the bushing, but you can refer to other videos for that. So 15 millimeter is what you'll need for this step to take off your skid plates.
And there's 2 skid plates.
So next thing you'll need is a 19 millimeter on a impact preferably, but if you're doing it by hand, you want a 19 millimeter, go ahead and come on now. We're going to talk about Milwaukee. You need to sponsor us, but we just tried the DeWalt. Now let's see the difference here. Hey, I used to be a DeWalt man.
I bleed yellow too. We're gonna take out the tie rods.
Okay.
The bushings.
So we're using it depends on
It depends on the model.
the model, but it's either an 18 or a 21, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so in this case it's a 21,
Yes, sir.
and we're gonna go ahead and remove the tie rods at this point on both sides. There's many ways to do it, but Frank has, like I said, he's done this a lot too. He's got little ways he likes to do it first. So he's removing that clamp. If you want more detail, go to our other videos on how to install each one of these things individually. But we'll remove the clamp off of there at this point. Again, like we talk about our other videos, it's going to be easiest if you turn the steering wheel all the way to this side. It's just easier to get that tie rod off. Okay, so one of the things that Frank just showed me is an easier way for you guys to do one component of this. Again, we're not going to go in great detail. We've done great detail on how to do the bushing. I've got multiple videos. We'll put a link to our most recent one here. But when it comes time to pulling out the black plastic keeper, easiest way to do it is just take a drywall screw, drive in it, take a pair of pliers, pull it out. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer thing.
Yes, sir. Instead of you having to
Instead of us pushing those tabs in and then trying to fight with the pick. Again, every time we do this, and that's why we rely on guys like Frank out here doing these things, because we come up with quicker and easier ways for you guys. So just note that. So now we're gonna go ahead and install the bushing. Kenny's gonna go ahead and do this component of it. We like to add just a little bit of grease on this O-ring. This is your install tool. Again, for the all the steps and details, I encourage you to watch our video on that, but that's our next step here. So Kenny's gonna go ahead and install that. Okay, while we're on this side and doing this, we're gonna go ahead and stay on the steering for a minute and install the buster brace. We're not gonna reinstall the tie rod at this point because we're gonna be later on pulling everything off to do the suspension, but Frank's gonna go ahead and again, there's a right and a left. So this one goes on the left because the bigger goes to the outer. So here's yours for the, for that side. When we're talking about what this does, how it works, you'll see there's a pocket on the inside there. The whole purpose of that pocket is when you put it on that tie rod, you're locating it right there. The pocket is for adjustment of your nut. It has plenty of room to adjust in there. And it's basically acting like a gusset on a truss. It's reinforcing from straight across the outer tie rod, across the inner tie rod, which is, in that span is the weakest point. When that clamps together, no more broken tie rods. A key on the install is there are two different size bolts because of this being shorter. These are shorter bolts. and these are longer bolts. So make sure you keep them straight. The longer bolts go in the longer part, the shorter bolts go in the shorter. Okay, so Frank just brought up another helpful tip to you guys, especially anybody that has the 2.7 liter. You've got this intercooler line here, and when we got to loosen the rack right here, if you're not careful, you can damage that. Is that what you're saying, right, Frank? So what he does is go ahead and takes a 10 millimeter and pulls that off out of the way. So go ahead and do that. So with that out of the way, now it's a lot easier to get to that bolt without possibly damaging something there. So just a little tip. Next step is we're doing what, Frank?
We're gonna be doing the billet piece.
Okay, so the reason why we just removed that intercooler piece, so we can loosen the rack on this side, we're gonna remove the bolt on the other side. Again, we go into great detail on our other videos on that.
Sure.
But the whole idea is we're gonna take all this apart like we did on the driver's side. We're gonna do that to the passenger side. We're gonna drop that rack down so now we can do these components.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now that we've removed the tie rod on this end, we're gonna go ahead and pull this last bolt. We've already loosened the other side. Now the rack will drop down. Okay, now with the rack drop down, our next step is that Frank's gonna grab a Torx, a T30.
Yes.
And we're going to remove 8 screws. There's 7 of them in the front, 1 of them in the back, so that we can pop that old hose or the old housing off to put the new housing on.
You preferably want to bang on the old one, huh?
Yeah, oh yeah. Definitely. But sometimes you can just get like a little sweet spot. Should just go straight towards you now.
Okay, so another little trick on the dowel pin that Frank just talked about was instead of maybe taking pliers that I've talked about on the other videos, if you just take a pick and go from the back side. Okay, so now with these dowel pins out, we'll go ahead and put them into the new part. So you can tell where they go. It's the same location that came out of, but there's also a little step where they sit. And all these dowel pins do is just to line things up when you're putting it back together. They don't serve a huge purpose, but they do make it nicer to line it up. We're putting the bolt in to pull these out. I have one with it in it still. So here's an old housing. So we're putting a bolt in like, where's your bolt at? Right there. So putting that bolt in, and then you just hit the housing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, I mean, if you're not gonna reuse this, then yeah, you can take and hit the housing, pop that out, or you can just set it up on the table and drive that piece out. So it comes out pretty easily. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and clean the old grease off. We're ensuring that there's no metal shavings in there. If we find some, then we'll want to go ahead and grease it, cycle the steering, wipe it again. But for this first one, we're going to see what we find. Again, this is on a new Bronco, never been off-road yet, and little shavings. So I mean, you can still see when you shine it in the light, you can still see little sparklies, little, but very minimal. So we're just going to go ahead and we're not going to wipe it a second time. It's clean. So we'll go ahead and wipe it clean. You do have some contact marks on the rack where, you know, you've seen a little bit. And again, this is a stock vehicle, never been off-road yet. And is this a huge problem yet? No. Over time, yes. And that's what we're accomplishing with the new housing, especially if you put lift. I mean, if you put lift on, those angles now start just bringing that up and down a lot. Good toothpaste amount of grease on my finger and apply it on that rack. Maybe twice, just to get a good application back on there. And then we make sure that we have some grease inside of that steel bushing, because that's what it's going to be supported on and riding on. So I just give it a nice generous amount on the inside of that bushing, and then we're good to go for the reinstallation. Okay, it's all yours, Frank. So now he's putting some gasket maker on there to put a new seal. That's all it is. They just use a silicone based gasket on there. All we're trying to do is keep the water and moisture out, is it. Okay, so now the next step is going to go ahead and do the suspension lift portion of it. So again, we're doing the 1.5" level kit with an 1.5" perch collar. So Kenny's going to go ahead and show us how to get that done because he's done many of the suspension lifts before. This is right up his alley. We'll go ahead and get started on that portion.
So on this side we got 315s on the top. You have your upper ball joint, which is an 18, and the 2 lower 18s for your lower bolts on the shock. So on these I normally mark on the top hat where the edge of the spring is, and then on the front where the sticker is, I mark where the bottom of the spring lines up with a piece of the pencil mark. So everything lines back up whenever you install it back in. And I'll put a little bit of tension on these and then loosen the nut, because if you don't leave tension on it, it'll just spin inside the shock housing. And once you get the nut loose, take it off.
So is there any safety precautions that we need to be
These things are
conscious
super
of?
sketchy.
Yes.
These are like the most
So
unsafe.
if this is not something you feel perfectly comfortable with, I recommend taking it to a local suspension shop. Most shops are going to have a way to compress springs. So don't do this unless you feel comfortable, because if that comes loose, it can be dangerous for sure.
So when you get the top hat off, there's a spacer in there that you gotta remove, and then you can remove the inner one. But I'll compress the spring a little bit more before we get it all off. So then you gotta take this top part off.
Okay, so with that off, then you pull the whole thing up, right? So we've got 2 different sizes. To level out the Bronco, we're putting the bigger one in the front and the smaller one in the back. And reassemble it the same way it came apart.
Maxes out for sure.
One of my key partners in this is Austin Bracken Machine out of Preston, Idaho. Every one of these parts, we do not source overseas. We make these here in the US. All of this design, the tolerances are just perfect because Austin is meticulous about perfection. So I give him a lot of kudos for making parts for us that are top quality parts, top quality aluminum, and done right. Okay, so now in this part, we finished the steering items. We're going to work on the suspension. So under the suspension, Kenny here is going to take it as the expert here, but there's a couple of steps that we need to do, and we're going to step you through it. And I'm just going to first go over. You're going to need a large socket. It's a 35 millimeter because you're going to want to take out the nut for the half shaft for the axle. So that's going to be your first thing you'll take out. You're going to remove the upper control arm bolt, which is 18 millimeter. So an 18 millimeter up there. Again, we already have our tie rod disconnected. So if it's not at this point, disconnect it. We're going to want to take all the bolts off of the bottom of your shock out of the lower control arm. That was an 18 millimeter also? 18 millimeter down there. And then what were these up here?
15.
So 15 millimeter on the top of your shock tower. There's 3 of them up there. You'll remove all of that. and your sway bar, which is another 18, right? 21. Or 21, sorry. Sway bar is a 21 millimeter. So you're gonna wanna have all those tools. We're gonna then remove those components and drop that down so we can pull our shock tower out, and then we'll go over, Kenny's gonna explain to you, if you decide you wanna do it, how you can compress the shock to put the perch collar on. Then we're gonna install, in this case, we're doing a perch collar, 1.5 inch, and we're doing an 1.5 inch suspension also. So we'll start there. So one of the things on this, I recommend if you're gonna do this yourself, it is easier to have an extra set of hands. I mean, I think Kenny could do it by himself, but there's some of this that you're trying to line everything back up. Having that extra set of hands would go really handy. So maybe bring your wife out or a helper or something. So
Put the kids to work.
put the kids to work, yeah. 5-year-old, 4-year-old, whatever. Teach them young.
This one right here, on this side, I believe.
So again, maybe even 3 hands, right? And then really it's reassembling everything back the way you took it apart. At this point, we're reattaching the top of the shock tower. We'll then put the bolts, we'll finish tightening the lower control arm. We'll reattach the spindle nut from the axle, tighten that back up. Sway bar, and then we're gonna reattach the upper control arm, which is another one of those items that you'll probably need to put a jack underneath it to get it up, and then you're gonna need a couple hands to get that down because you're quite compressed right now. So to bring it all back in, that's what it takes. Now, I get a lot of people ask, why are you not swapping out the upper control arms? We're coming out with a new upper control arm. Some of the ones that we've run in the past, and I will not mention names, aftermarket, we've actually had more problems with. So we've actually had better luck with the stock ones, and we're able to get everything aligned and the geometry correct. Everybody talks geometry. We got to understand geometry is affected once you put a lift. Upper control arm is not going to correct the fact that your geometry is off on your CVs, your geometry is off on your tie rod. It all comes down to the whole purpose of changing out your upper control arm is because as your wheels go down, your tires want to do this. And so you'll have to get an alignment to be able to correct all that camber and stuff. We're able to get alignment with the stock upper control arms. I'm not saying that's your optimum. Definitely research and get the best. If you're going to change out your uppers, get a good quality one. Here in the next few months, we're going to have a billet piece that'll be replacing that. But those are just options for you. On the rear one, I'm just cutting it off flush, grinding it, smoothing up all the edges, and then again, we'll touch that up with black paint. You won't even see it, and it doesn't serve any purpose at this point. Okay, so while we're waiting on grinder and Sawzall to cool down, because with all this grinding, we're just kind of working on a few things. This is an aesthetics thing. So Frank is removing the shutter here, which is not, if you live down here in Texas where we live, the only purpose of that shutter is in the wintertime, it'll shut and reduce the amount of airflow so you're not cooling it down too fast. It lets things warm up. For us, it's just, this is an aesthetic thing, and so we're pulling it out of there, getting rid of it. Okay, so now Frank and I are at the point where we're gonna go ahead and do the front bumper relocate. So this is the key thing to know what bumper you have. If you have what's called Ford's standard bumper, which came on the base model, on the Big Bend model, and on Wild Track, because this is a Wild Track, if it did not have the modular capable, the front capable bumper. So in this case, that's what we call on our website the standard bumper relocate. And what we're doing is we have the 3 bolt holes. So we've pulled the bumper off. So everybody knows how to pull the bumper. You pull those plastic pieces, bumper comes off, disconnect. I don't need to show that. But this bracket here is going to go up. We're going to put our stock bolts through those 3 points. So what we did is we designed a piece here that matches kind of the design in the grill that fills that gap, because when the bumper comes up, now that gap is filled in nice and tight and looks good. And still allows plenty of airflow through to your intercooler. So while I'm waiting on Frank to tighten those down, you'll get with your package for the front, standard bumper Relocate, this sets of 4 hardware, 12 millimeter, and I'll show you how those go on. Because these are exposed, I forgot I gotta paint these. Okay, we are almost wrapping up. We've now got the bracket on. We're gonna mount the front bumper. We'll put the skid plates back on. The body lift is done. We've got all the shocks mounted. We're sitting at a good 6 inches taller in the front. It's nice leveled out. I think it's looking killer. So let's go ahead and finish these bumpers up. Okay, so we're reattaching the electrical connections. We'll go ahead and throw these back on. Where's our plastic pieces? Oh, good. I'll give you the baby impact so we don't break anything. Daddy impact, baby impact. Daddy impact, baby impact. Okay, a couple things to talk about on this install. Number one, these bolts are going to be exposed. These bottom two, they were the ones that came off. You're going to want to paint them with some black paint. I like to do it after it's on so that you don't scuff the paint off of it. Just put some tape around, touch it up with some paint. I think earlier you might have seen me with these installed. We're going to leave those out because those actually is the third one going back in here. So go ahead and set the bumper on now and we'll show you. So now we're going to go ahead and do the shocks, the perch collar, and the suspension lift on the rear. And to do that, of course, you're going to remove your wheel. I like to have the jack right in this position. And have you already jacked it up a little bit, or just?
Yeah, it's already ready to go.
Okay, so now we'll go ahead and pull that rear shock mount out. So now we're going to do the rears. Same exact as we did the fronts. You know, we'll go ahead and put our spring compressor on, compress it down, take this nut off, pull everything apart, install the perch collar, reassemble. So watch that part if you need to go back in the video, watch that, but that's the same process. So this is a good point in the build to go ahead and, since you already have the shock tower off, when you go to reinstall it, to put this in place and put the bolt through it. We're not going to install this yet today on this build because we're actually going to be making some changes later on. Right now we're just doing to get 40s on here, and this will be something that comes later. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and reinstall. First, get the bolts on here. Now, after we did this, we got thinking, you know, we probably should have done the body lift first, because the body lift, we would have had amples of room to get up in there. So note to you, maybe change the order of how you do this. Do the body lift before installing, before doing your shocks. So. That looks sexy. That's one down here. Come on up. I got the good impact. The two front ones we found are easier to break loose first by hand and not use an impact, because if you use an impact, sometimes those are in there so tight with the Loctite that it'll actually spin the nut that's in the body. So I recommend to break them loose by hand first. Okay, real quick. Okay, so now on this part, we're gonna go ahead and do the body lift. So again, with the body lift, we wanna start with loosening the bolts by hand and not using an impact, because sometimes they're in there pretty tight. If you don't loosen them by hand first, you can possibly, we've had a couple people experience bringing that nut loose that's in the body, and then it becomes a big job. So do them by hand first, then use your impact. And we're gonna go ahead and loosen, take all the bolts out of the driver's side, loosen the passenger side. We're gonna take a jack and a block of wood right now, and we're blocking up this side until we get enough room to put the 3-inch pucks in, and then we'll go ahead and put our bolts in. All right, so what we've done is we've pulled off the stock brackets. We've installed these brackets that we send you with you. That's what allows you to relocate this. So of course, remove the bumper. This video, we're going over briefly everything because I don't want it to be too long of a video. This is how to fit 40s. Our other videos go into more depth, but it's as simple as pulling off the bracket, installing the new bracket using that hardware. We already send this hardware that, depending on if it's going 2.5 inches or 3 inches on the plastic bumper, we can do both. So in this case, we have it set for the 3-inch. And now we're going to go ahead and install it back up there. On the steel bumper, it has a total different bracket, and there's one additional part that helps to reinforce this, but that's a different install video. All right, well, thanks for joining us on how to put 40s on a Bronco. Justin, hopefully this exceeded your expectations on having a tall beast.
This is great. Everything I wanted to do with it since I got it. You make an excellent product, easy to install, easy function, works great. I love it.
Okay, great help here today from Frank. Frank is with our San Antonio group. He does these a lot in San Antonio for other people. We've got Kenny here with America Motors right here in Canyon Lake, Texas, and he's joining the team as far as being one of our certified installers. So don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos from us, and we'll see you next time.